everyone. This week in our runecast, we remain in Algiz through the 12th of February, at which point we move into Sowilo. So we will be working with these two runes in sequence, and what an interesting time. We've talked about Algiz as the rune of protection, stemming from this pokey elk sedge grass, which I'm assuming by default, where you have elk sedge, you have elk who are also pokey. Very territorial, deeply steeped in ecosystem working together as a unit, which if we as animists, the human person in the equation, can become a balanced part of that ecosystem, then we are benefited by that protection as well as contributing to that protection for everybody else in the ecosystem. And the thing that I find really important about that protective part is when we have that kind of relationality in our ecosystem, that means that it becomes part of us. It goes with us everywhere that we go. And it becomes this sort of calling card that even when we move into other ecosystems, the relationality that we have with our ecosystem can go before us and introduce us. That's a ritual that I talk about quite a lot in sort of beginning basic things that people can do as animists and as good stewards of ecosystems that you're passing through. It can also work in reverse. You can call yourself back, things that you leave in a place that you visited, clean it up. You can announce your arrival. You can announce your departure. These things are part of hygiene, I think, in moving between ecosystems, but they're also protective because you're bringing the relationships of your ecosystem with you everywhere you go. The intuitive rune that we're working with, I want to go ahead and move on to that and its relationship with Algiz before we move into Sowilo and that transition and Sowilo's relationship with the intuitive rune. The rune that we're working with, I never do get this right with the whole right to left thing in mirror opposites. The rune that we're working with, I don't know how clear that is Thurisaz. So again, prickly, thorn. We're talking about being able to understand where we need to be really careful. That's what Thurisaz speaks to me. The thorn is unavoidable. You can't precious your way around the thorn. You can't talk your way out of the thorn. The thorn is experienced, and all you can do is keep your awareness such that here's how I respond, here's how I adapt. Not terribly unlike Harrell, but Thurisaz is internal. And the thorn that I typically identify with when we are in the progression of the Elder Futhark is the inner Jotun. Like, what is the part of you that is primal, unrefined, and exactly as it's supposed to be? And how much control are you giving it? I mean, that's the bottom line. It's not that you extract the parts of you that are wild and primal, which I always feel like a good question when I use those words is compared to what? Wild and primal compared to what? Because if we're having the animist conversation, then wild and primal don't have any meaning. So the whole idea that there are parts of us that are not sophisticated, they're not civilized, they don't behave in the manner appropriate to the systems that we have deemed socially acceptable, I feel like there's room for some questions all around that. And at the same time, the part of us that is absolutely feral, maybe that's a more appropriate word, the part of us that is aligned with very seasonal, cyclical, explosive, emotional, deeply passionate feeling All of these things are the version of us that has not been polished. It has not been cleaned up in a way that makes it necessarily palatable or comfortable for other people, other beings. If we don't have a clear understanding that we hold a part of us that is that way, and if we're not in relationship with that part of us in a way that is healthy, the experiences that we have as we bump into these social systems, the potential to not be heard, to not be seen, to not be validated, to not be valued, shapes that feral part of us in a potentially dangerous way. I don't particularly feel that they are bad or harmful. They just are. And how we're in relationship with them, how much we allow them to be in the driver's seat is what matters. Because if you're in particularly American, Western settler culture, then there are going to be parts of your inner Jotun that are nasty, mean, conniving, and also grieving, sore, unheard, unseen, all of that stuff. That's part of being in this culture at this time on the planet. How aware are you of that part of you? How much attention do you give it? How much does it need? And if you can give it attention, let it be voiced in containers of safe space. It doesn't have to bleed over in the rest of your life. When I sit with how Thurisaz is saying that we can best Algiz, it's to be in touch with that feral part of ourselves, maybe by watching our ecosystem, watching how the beings that we live and move among every day handle their own wildness, and how does that come back on them? If you pay attention to the birds in your yard or the squirrels in your yard, then you know they have wars. They squabble, they fight, they're territorial. How does that all work out? Is everybody still ending up being fed? Is somebody getting shut out? I think that's the kind of teaching that Thurisaz suggests we pay attention to in Algiz. How does our ecosystem embrace its wildness? And how does it still sustain alongside us as humans? When we talk about Sowilo, everyone always approaches it from the standpoint of the sun, which is completely accurate. I feel like there is a lot going on with Sowilo from an animist perspective that relates to how we can use it for guidance. Sowilo is sun, or the daylight portion of existence, but it is literally the star that gives us light, warmth, life, growth. And the way that people often talk about Sowilo is from like a worshipful place, that lightness, brightness, sometimes attributing the quality of goodness to this as well, which is not precedence, but this sort of like holding all of its absolute positiveness, and that is all. Therefore, that is all. If we sit with Sowilo as an animist and we think about what the sun is, it is what predominantly keeps most of the life, not all of the life, on this planet alive, growing, sustaining. And so there's this idea that if we're in relationship with the sun, we are gaining from the sun, and we then have the responsibility to take what we've gained and give it to others who need it. This pay it forward idea of the sun shines on me so that I may shine on others. When we sit with Thurisaz as the best way to Sowilo, I wonder if Thurisaz is pointing out any sort of prickles in that. We typically, at least in American settler culture, when we talk about the lightness, the brightness of things, it's to the detriment of there being anything else. But the reality is we couldn't survive if we were under direct sunlight all the time. There's a barrier. There are rainy days. There are clouds. There is literally a buffer between us and the sun because we wouldn't be able to survive direct sunlight. And so I bring that back to we also can't survive constantly giving, and we can't survive constantly thinking we're supposed to be the bright side of things, we're supposed to be the lightness, the goodness. So what does that mean? I think Thurisaz is bringing that back into a very realistic parameter for the rest of this week. If we're talking about the thorns in paying it forward, then we're talking about having to have a foundation from which to do that. And I think a lot of us don't have that right now. I think a lot of people don't have much foundation at all right now. And I'm talking specifically about people who don't have strong spiritual practices. They don't have some skills to cope with what life looks like on a daily basis right now. And I'm also talking about means and resources and trying to stay on top of how we keep ourselves resourced without worrying about where it's all going to come from. There's this component of needing to be resourced and have a strong foundation before we can help others. And there's another aspect of that is we have to have a strong foundation before we can really do enormous spiritual things. Spiritual stuff is not out there. It has to be also equally in here within the body. And until we're capable of holding the bigness of our spirituality, we won't be able to manifest it in our bodies. We won't be able to manifest things in our lives. So there's a lot, I think, going on with the Thurisaz relationship to Sowilo, which is be careful, be wise, be diligent in how you're expending your energy and your resources right now, but don't be stingy. Like don't intentionally hold back. And stay in a place of giving, a container of healthy, safe, balanced giving. I think it's telling us to just be careful, be thoughtful, be attentive, and yet stay in the Sowilo space that is the sun shines on me so that I may shine on others. Before I move on to talk about the other components, sort of like the support components of the runecast, I want to talk about this whole layout. I kind of go with whatever the background tells me it needs to be, whatever the implements that want to be present in the runecast, and sometimes they're not so photogenic as a result, but from a power standpoint, from an energy standpoint, they wanted to be there for a reason. And this theme of measurement, of seam ripping, of being able to take things apart where you need to, being able to stitch them together where you need to, I feel like that is all incredibly relevant for the day-to-day of our lives right now. It's a lovely metaphor to me, also meaningful, profound, and challenges me in being able to understand what I really need and what I don't, where I'm willing to rip the seams and let things go. That just seems to be the everyday task right now. When I asked what directions need to be called in specifically for the runecast this week, I again got this really, really strong nudge that it's not about a direction, it's about the cardinal point that's at the center of all of the cardinal directions. So we have north, we have east, we have south, and we have west. And what I feel like is really important about understanding what this is communicating is we have to be, again, really solid in foundation. And I take that to mean, like we said before, it means resources, it means health, it means like overall well-being and stability. Not perfect, but we need to understand and have an awareness of how to maintain our foundation. Because if we don't have a foundation, our spiritual work has nowhere to root. And that's what it comes down to. And that's what the cardinal directions provide. When you read about the dwarves, who are the cardinal directions in Old Norse culture, there is a projection that they must be earthly. Like they have to be representative of holding the earthly structure in place, because if they don't, we can't access anything beyond it. And that's the idea that I'm feeling in this runecast as well. The directions are literally where we stand. They are where your feet touch the ground every day. And ritualistic invocation of them is about bringing these beings from an other standpoint as well as a scientific standpoint into stable and strong relationship with your experience of here-ness. They create the safe space that is literally the container of sacred space when you do ritual. They're also the rules of how things work. And they are what uphold our relationship to Earth and to everything beyond Earth. So we have to have that earthly relationship firmly in place before we can really explore beyond that. And I feel like that is pointing us to not venture out a whole lot this week. If you tend to be trance-oriented, if you do ecstatic trance, it doesn't mean that you don't get to be your spiritual self, but it is saying that you need to make sure that your foundation is taken care of before you go out real far. And the inverse of that is if you do go out real far and you're not taking care of your home base, then your home base suffers because it can't support what you bring back. And if you can't support what you bring back will leave. The element that we're working with this week is air, which brings a kind of salvation in a way. Air is the element of transmission. It came up not too long ago, not in the last 2 or 3 runecasts. Where this matters is air has the capacity to let our intentions be heard. It carries our will, our desire, our emotion. It carries things that have nothing to do with us, things that are errant. They're just out in the environment to be picked up on, to pass by. It carries energy and maybe beings from all things, and we're moving through it all the time. But where air becomes deeply personal and intimate is when we are praying, when we are blessing, when we are crying out. Whatever we do that sends intention into beyond ourselves, not even beyond Earth, but just beyond ourselves. It's the space of spell weaving. It's the space of soothsaying. What we put into air or onto air goes somewhere. It travels. It's not only a being that gets moved away from us and to some place that maybe we get to determine the destination, maybe we don't, but in that travel takes on its own agency. There's the whole raido overtone with air, I think, and the relationship with ansus, which is breath and speaking and putting things out into being. There's a relationship with air with those, and I feel like it's telling us, as Don Miguel Ruiz would say, be impeccable with your speech. Be very clear in your internal intentions, the things that are unspoken. Again, Thurisaz level stuff, your inner Jotnar. Be very careful with how you put things forward, how you speak, how you interact, and even with your prayers, with your blessings. Think through what you're really asking for this week. Think through what you're really giving your energy this week. The season that is sort of the tone or the backdrop that we need to take to our spirit working this week is winter. So we just talked about all of the directions creating this cardinal point in the center, and it is that center of the directions that we need to be focused on this week. And we've talked about foundation, we've talked about rooting and grounding, and we even talked about like Thurisaz is presenting a little bit of a damper when it comes to Algiz and like maybe how we experience ecosystem. We're asked to experience maybe how ecosystem resolves conflict or deals with its own versions of pokiness. And with Sowilo, we've talked about Thurisaz maybe having you question, where do I need to make sure my own house is secure before I go, trying to save everybody else's and yet maintain a container of giving. There's a lot of restraint going on in this runecast, a great deal of developing your space, developing your sort of cozy unit, whatever you perceive that to be, as nurturing to you, as fundamental to your survival for what is happening, not just this week, but perhaps ongoing. And being able to find the resources that you need to sustain that and still be aware of what your calling is asking you to do, both your personal calling, your ancestral lineages calling or callings. And winter is underscoring that. The tone of winter means keep it close, not necessarily stingy, again, not necessarily completely withholding, but aware that your resources are limited, aware of what you need to have and can possibly give up, what you need to feel secure, not just in your home space, but internally at a Thurisaz level. And it's also expressing that we remember our ecosystem is going through this as well. It is not just humanity understanding the pressure we're all under right now. Your ecosystem understands that and is also feeling it and reacting to it, as well as beyond Earth. Whatever you experience lies beyond the human formed being into the unseen. That area is also experiencing coming to terms with what they're really here to do. Whether that's about us, things that have nothing to do with us, we are still part of it. And we are all going through this experience right now. The tension of it and the need to dial in and really focus on what is most important, what you are absolutely responsible to do, and what your calling needs from you. So winter is also ideally a place of stores, meaning we have what we need. We did the harvest. The harvest was good because Yera is always optimistic, and we have what we need. We may not have everything we want, but we have what we need to make our foundational things be true, be firm right now. And I can see the challenge in that. I can see the challenge in relaxing into maybe that wintry perspective of pluriversal paycheck. And yet the necessity of staying faithful to the understanding that we are tended in some way by something bigger than ourselves. When we have this transitional week and we have 1/2 month rune giving way to another, I pair it as Algiz and Thurisaz in the Galder, then Sowilo and Thurisaz in the Galder. If you Galder all three of these runes together, that is not this runecast. You're doing somebody else's runecast. So when we work with Algiz in the Galder, we have Elraz or Eo, Algi, Elha, Elha, Elwa. There are so many different ways that I hear this one pronounced and the Galder for it. And with Thurisaz, we have Dur, Duri. With Sowilo or Sowilu, we have So, Sol, Solwi, Soli, and Sig. When you Galder, I think it's important to come into relationship with the sounds first. Let your mouth, your breath, your body feel them in your head rolling around, feel them resonate through your whole body, and then come back to where pronunciation suits your relationship with Galder. And you may find that it doesn't, and that is okay. For me, this is how this Galder comes together. Ali Dori, Ali Dori, Ali Dori, Ali Dori, Ali Dori, Ali Dori. This Galder gave me a sense of slow motion. Literally, I felt my energy system pulsing with the cadence of very slow walking. Like when you're walking very intentionally, you're thinking toe, heel, you're that into the act of walking. That's what my energy system felt like. Walking is recommended for everything, like to meditate, to calm down, to reset neurotransmitters, so many different things. And I felt my energy system the way that it feels when I'm doing that kind of walking, only I'm sitting, of course. I would love to hear your experiences of now, your experiences of the runecast as it relates to now, and I hope all of your needs are met this week.